If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre-scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This is another fabulous guest episode, and I feel like it's really timely because we're all probably feeling those New Year challenges that often lead to the need for everyone to go on a little bit of a vacation in the first quarter of the year. We're going to talk a ton about burnout, but let me first introduce you to Dr. Jacqueline Kerr. She is a behavior scientist and burnout survivor. She is in the top 1% of most cited scientists worldwide and received over $56 million in funding from the National Institutes of Health to research health behavior change solutions for individuals and communities. Dr. Kerr left her position as a public health professor in 2018 and now hosts the podcast Overcoming Work Mom Burnout, where she interviews CEOs, researchers, diversity experts, and leadership coaches. Her TEDx talk, How to Stop Burnout Before It Starts, explains how burnout is a multi-level problem and provides actionable solutions that we can all use to change the social norms around burnout based on behavior change science. Dr. Kerr is helping women leaders with training and peer learning collaboratives on how to lead through change, manage change, and leverage change for transformational organizational change. Her behavior science tools and evidence-based frameworks and strategies help leaders move beyond the status quo to lead the thriving, diverse workforce of the future. I'm first of all fangirling because you have a TED Talk. Secondly, I'm fangirling because I love change, and I have never used the word change more than I did in that last part of your bio, which I love. And the third reason I'm fangirling is because I always talk about challenging the status quo. So with that, welcome Dr. Jacqueline Kerr. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to have this conversation. It's so great to connect with people who are also trying to challenge the status quo and are lovers of change. It's a difficult thing. Change is really hard. And like you said, we're in the new year, and all failing on our New Year's resolutions. It's January the 31st. We've all failed pretty much. And two, like Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, she came back from the holidays and said, I've got nothing left in the tank. And this is such a problem for women leaders.
Yeah, it's really true. And the reason why I talked about how we're in this new year and I'm sure everyone's ready for a vacation is because I'm ready for a vacation. And I know that I'm not the only one feeling this way. And, I've heard from so many people that January was like the longest, it was like 3 months worth of 1 month. And it's really true. We're recording this on the last day of January. And I'm like, how has it only been 31 days? It feels like 90. So is this something that you hear a lot when it comes to burnout or even people maybe approaching that burnout phase?
So I don't necessarily know that there's a different time of year where burnout is higher. Certainly, I think if you have a family and you have really spent a lot of energy into the holidays, potentially celebrating different cultural or vacations during that time, and you've been trying to make the perfect Christmas for your children, then
Mm-hmm.
yes, you could be entering the new year. And that's actually the time to take the break. You might look at that vacation time when the kids are on holiday and go, this is my time to give to them because that's what makes me feel good. But I do recognize that I'm going to need to have recovery afterwards. Now, there are some scientists also like Katie Milkman, who's a behavior scientist, who says fresh starts are really important for behavior change. And that's why, in some ways, New Year is an opportunity or a large birthday. But actually, my research never found that sort of connection, because we would see people even after a major heart attack or a loss of a loved one or a divorce or so many major life events that you think would make people want to change their behaviors, and it wouldn't happen. So I just think the biggest issue we're facing at the moment is burnout is chronic unmanaged stress. And the CDC just brought out data, the Center for Disease Control just brought out data. We are experiencing higher stress levels than ever before.
Hmm.
Pretty much, across the world. I mean, essentially, the experience of um, COVID and the stress and uncertainty that created, it was then this perfect vector for a mental health epidemic as well. So people are then coping with mental health problems in their children, in colleagues, family mentors, plus their own stress. So there's that feeling of sort of contagion around the stress. So I just feel like we all have this elevated level of stress. It's impacting how we respond, how we treat each other, how we treat frontline workers, for example, which is just so tragic that
Mm-hmm.
we're frustrated and as I say, you know, in some cases abusive to
Mm-hmm.
our frontline workers. Obviously, people are frustrated with so many parts of this. And then we're moving into a time of financial uncertainty, plus, all the trauma that keeps happening to communities during COVID losses, communities due to shootings, communities due to racial beatings and other racial traumas. I mean, there's just so much going on at the moment that is, um, what and our exposure to it through social media, that it doesn't surprise me that we're having this elevated stress, but it's been for such a long time now. So that's why it's moving into, you know, I need a vacation. But unfortunately, the vacations aren't necessarily the answer. I certainly,
Right.
as I say, for mums, if you take a break from being a mum and work and all these things, it can be really great to reset and help your brain work again. But to be honest, a vacation doesn't solve burnout, because the problem is in the workplace, not
Right.
necessarily with the person.
Right. It's really interesting what you said. And I'm reflecting back on what we had initially talked about a number of months ago, which was this concept around burnout being chronic stress, and that kind of coming back to your TED talk, that, how do you prevent it from happening? Essentially, I know I'm kind of just vaguely touching, grazing over the title, but it's really how to stop burnout before it starts. And when I think about that, and when I think about, you're right, vacations are just a band-aid to the problem, right? And the reality is that there's potentially this like gaping wound that needs to be sewn up. How do we do that? Actually, one of the first questions that I have for you is how social media plays a role in this, because while I understand and can totally see how workplaces have a huge impact on burnout. I mean, we're spending sometimes more time at work than we are at home or doing other things. But does was it? Maybe it's a two-part question. Was work before the advent of social media more manageable, like the stress of work more manageable. And so burnout wasn't as much of a chronic issue. Whereas now we have social media and all of these other things that you've mentioned adding on to what we are experiencing at work. Like, is there a difference? Maybe this is probably someone's thesis somewhere out in their doctoral program, right?
It's a great question. It's a really hard question too. And just to go back to that difference you mentioned from prevention to burnout, I think vacations and taking rest can prevent burnout, but it's not a burnout recovery strategy. I mean, yes, like I took a 3-month leave of absence. I was really privileged to be able to do that. And some people are taking sabbaticals. But what happens then is you reset your flight or fright system, right? Because your amygdala, all these words, your amygdala is enlarged. You're in this state of fight or flight. Some people call it paper tigers, you know, that you're terrified. Everything feels like a threat to you. And then when you can actually take a break, it resets. So I did, and I was able to calm and reset. But then when I went back into the workplace, the stress hit me like a truck because I actually was this kind of blank slate. Whereas previously, I'd been swimming in the stress all the time, didn't even notice it, had many coping strategies because, you know, I exercised every day and, you know, tried to avoid too much alcohol and ate healthy in these things. But the stress of going back to work definitely hit me like a truck. So that's kind of the what is the process of like recovery versus sort of prevention. And rest is so important. It's such an important part of it. And so that you can reset your body. Because often it's physical symptoms we can be having, panic attack or illnesses or suicide ideation. So something needs to be reset in your body as well. And then you are allowed to then, your body will then allow your brain to start thinking again. Because usually what happens is our brain has been giving the messages about burnout and we've been ignoring it. So then it goes, okay, I'm going to let the body take over and tell you that you've got to stop. But again, if you tell someone whose self-worth is tied to their productivity, and that's many of us, then rest doesn't match their value system or their sense of self-worth. So it can be really challenging. That's why it's a hard message. But let's answer then now the even more difficult question of social media. And I will always say, I am not actually a social media expert, you know, that, like you say, it will be someone's thesis. But I know a colleague of mine kept reminding me, she said, can you make sure in your TEDx talk, and I didn't have room to say this, but she wanted me to make room to say it. She was saying, you know, scrolling on social media, we know if we can also take social media breaks, that is good for our mental health. And I just didn't really have enough room to say that. And again, it wasn't my main message, but it is an important message. So I think the process of being on social media potentially, I mean, some people find the scrolling relaxing, but like, is it numbing? Is it fulfilling? Like what is it? I mean, it's okay to check out because if that's what your brain needs, but maybe there are other more productive ways, like not productive, but like more healthy ways of checking out. But I think the biggest thing is the expectations that have come because of social media. So the expectations for everyone. So not just like as a mom. So like the expectations of mums now to be this ideal worker 24/7 and an ideal mum 24/7. You have to work as if you're don't have kids and parent as though you don't have a job. So those types of expectations and the presentation of perfectionism that is on social media and the sort of fear of missing out, all those sorts of things, that is very much putting stress and unrealistic, unreasonable expectations on everyone. But also our kids, you know, and you think about the mental health epidemic in teens. Again, that in itself is a tragedy, and that is, associated with social media. But then the parents of those kids are having to try and help them with really serious problems. And my son does struggle with mental health. And part of my journey was to actually admit to my husband that when I'm helping my son with his mental health, I feel drained afterwards.
Mm,
And I find it a really challenging part of parenting. And so now we still agreed that I was probably the best person to have those conversations with him. But now my husband says to me, "Thanks for talking to our son. I know you find it difficult." And that changed everything,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
So whether it's before or after, again, it's so hard to attribute that social media made burnout higher. I think certainly COVID has had
Yeah,
a big impact on um, burnout across many industries, but particularly, as I say, in our healthcare workers, for example.
right.
Um, yeah, so I can't necessarily say that there's a social media that there was a
An
really
uptick.
noticeable change. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing your own personal story as well. I think, many listeners, I'm sure, are relating one way or another to what you're sharing. And I can also appreciate that you're not just giving some random answer, because you are, based in science and truth, and you try to seek out, logical explanations. So if anyone out there is doing a dissertation or a thesis on this, let us know, because we're interested on, at least I am, but I think many of us are probably asking this question, like, how has social media impacted us in this way? And I guess by the question you can kind of tell that although I'm on social media, I'm always like, if there's just one more reason for me to get off, I will just totally ditch it. But then I'm like, see, this is what it does to you. You have to find a reason to, what if I just deleted it? But then, it's this unbelievable, perplexing mental game and strain that I feel I'm not the only one involved in.
Yeah, and how does it make you feel when you're on it? Because again, I struggle. I only joined social media in 2021, right? And because in as an academic, I had the privilege of not needing social media for my messaging, right?
Hmm.
I had my academic communication channels,
Right.
and I am so uncomfortable. I found it so fearful to be in that space. And even now, I don't get, my cup doesn't get filled when I'm sitting there posting or commenting. I'm learning masses, which I love, but
Yeah.
it is from this place of not feeling good enough, and
Yeah,
it's a
yeah, there's like,
challenge.
yeah, it's really true. It's really true. There's definitely um this air of needing to compare, what, and I've shared this a few times on my podcast, that I'm one that, tends to be very competitive. I want to be the best that I can be, high achieving, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, especially as it relates to, high achievers and the guardrails that we need to have when it comes to burnout and preventing burnout. So we'll come back to that, but just to kind of close out this thought on social media, I mean, there is a lot of comparison, but there's also a lot of learning, and maybe that's part of learning, is realizing what you are doing versus what you're not doing, or what you could be doing. But I was very fortunate to grow up. This might, you guys might figure out my age, even though I probably have shared it before. But in college, I remember the first time ever experiencing Instagram, and I think I was in my junior year, and there was no like Instagram stories. It was just like whatever picture you wanted to post. And so everything was very, you were very present for your life. Like everything was very, whatever you're doing in the moment, you're taking pictures, sure, and then maybe posting to Facebook and Instagram later. And then you're creating a LinkedIn because you have to get a job after college. But it wasn't as ingrained, at least from what I can remember. It wasn't as ingrained in every single part of our lives as it is today. And I find that when I am on social media, I'm typically, I would say 90% of the time that I'm spending is from a professional standpoint, whether it's LinkedIn or from my podcast or connecting with people. However, that 10% of the time when it's not, I'm just like, why am I wasting my life? Why am I wasting the time that I could be spending with my husband or going to the gym or doing something else? Which is kind of where that question came from, because I'm sure that there are others out there who feel that it's not filling their cup, to your point. And so I guess the segue for me here is wondering, for those of us who are maybe higher achievers or want to be higher achievers, they are potentially, if I were to repeat anything my family has said, it's, why don't you take a break? Why are you adding more onto your plate? Sit down and relax. And so what you're saying about, those who value productivity, that doesn't help me. And I'm going to need to send them this episode. That doesn't help me. Don't tell me to relax. I know what I have to do if I need to stop, but I can't stop. So how do we high achievers actually put in those guardrails to prevent burnout, so we're not just running a million miles a minute and then realizing that we have no fuse left? And then what is the difference for those who are maybe not as high achieving? And that's not to say that people don't have ambitions or goals or that they don't achieve their goals, for anyone listening. It's just that there is a difference sometimes between someone who is like driving for something constantly versus someone who is maybe a little bit more appreciative of the here and the now.
Such a good way of posing that question. Yeah. And yeah, that feeling of you can't stop. So, for example, the World Health Organization defines occupational burnout, job burnout, as exhaustion, cynicism, and lack of productivity. But there are other sort of symptoms that we experience that are helpful for people to recognize. And one of them is tired but wired, right? You cannot turn your brain off. And other people experience brain fog, where they're just stuck and they can't think clearly at all anymore. I was the tired but wired, like you are. So again, very, very driven by that high achievement. My self-worth was related to my productivity, for sure. And also that really I just worked so hard. So, part of this is in the there's two psychologists, Freudenberger and North. They have this burnout stages, this 12 stages. Stage number 1 is the need to prove yourself, and stage number 2 is working harder. And then from there, it goes all the way through to the point where you're, avoiding conflict, in a state of denial, withdrawn, isolated,
Wow.
depressed, suicidal, burnout, right? So I mean, it's those first 2 steps, right? And we also have this social norm around working harder, like more hours, being available that 24/7, always on, and always available. That is what is rewarded by our workplaces, by our merit reviews. It's always a stretch assignment and things like that. And so I'm always saying, well, actually, first, instead of like doing a merit review, why don't you do an equity review and see if they're even being paid right in the first place? And 2, rather than these stretch assignments, how about you reward the things that many women in particular are doing during the workday? For example, helping the mental health of their colleagues, contributing to DI efforts, doing all the unpaid office housework, right? There are so many other ways of approaching this. So I think that's partly is that we've taken the message. And to be honest, too, when a colleague of mine said to my husband, "Your wife is the hardest working person I've ever met," it wasn't who I wanted to be. Like when I heard that didn't make me proud. I was like, God, I'm an idiot. It was kind of how I was feeling. I was like, I want to be the smartest working person, or, efficient, or something else. So I think it comes back to these stories and values that we are still holding on to, that could have come from all sorts of ways. I mean, again, that need to prove yourself, where has that come from? It can be a certain personality tendency, and I call it a tendency rather than a trait, because it's something you can work on.
Right.
It could be because of the messaging you had during childhood. And to be honest, my childhood messaging was that because you worked hard, it isn't as good as an achievement as your brother who got there by natural talent alone, right? And so even if I did work hard, I never got the recognition, because even though I was brought up to work hard, there was some flaw in working hard too. And that's what really helped me when I read Mindset by Carol Dweck. It was all about what is a fixed versus open mindset. And basically she was saying, nobody who succeeds on talent alone. Everybody who succeeds also has to work hard. And I was like, oh, thank God. Yeah, I'm not flawed,
Right.
because I work hard, right? And so I think we have to think about that messaging. And then we also have to recognize that there are groups of people who are disadvantaged. Either they're seen to be less committed or incompetent. So, for example, mums are seen as less committed than dads. Unfortunately, people of color are often rated as being less competent. And so, yes, you're facing this stereotype that you have to overcome. And even if you overcome that stereotype to get to the same level of performance, you are then actually not judged on having equal performance, say, as your colleague who is a man. You're judged on your potential, and the potential of men are being rated higher than the potential of women. And we have lots and lots of research showing this. And as I say, things are much worse for women of color. So it's true, you have to prove yourself. You have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And again, it's not just in your imagination that, that the data really shows this is happening. So no wonder you're having to work harder and you're having to prove yourself. So there are so many reasons that we do. So part of the reason why we feel like we can't stop is because our experience has told us we have to do more to get there. And because of the stories we've told ourselves or we've been told. So one of the things I had to do is this real values re-evaluation and say, yes, I one of my values is being a hard worker, but one of my values is my health. One of my values is my family. One of my values is being honest, and I'm hiding the fact I'm burned out. There was so many conflicting values. So then I had to decide, okay, well, what do I do about that? How can I sort of match that and then work out a new set of values? Because you don't want to get to the point when you're saying you can't stop because you're so driven, to the point where you break. And again, we do have to really address our egos in this, right? There's a certain part of us that does gain from that feeling of being a martyr and giving everything. And even the ego I had as a professor, and I lost that identity, and I had to face the ego I had in that identity. And so, we think we are so important, right? We've convinced ourselves we are, and we maybe get feedback to reinforce that. But when, for example, Glennon Doyle said, do you want to set the role model to your daughter to be a martyr to motherhood? And I went, no. And like, do you want the same life you're having for your daughter? And I went, no. And so you're suddenly like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? So I think we forget that the harm we can be doing by the way we're we're driven, or leaving everything on the table.
It's important for any business to focus on their culture, employee well-being, and strategic growth. But without the proper tools, it can be next to impossible to support the people behind your success. That's why you need Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that empowers you to engage and develop your people in one intuitive platform. Namely's award-winning technology covers your essential HR, payroll, and compliance needs all in one place. Whether you have 50 or 1,000 employees, Namely's modern and integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone, every day. With a mobile app and elegant UI, Namely empowers employees with self-service tools to request PTO, acknowledge peers, review pay stubs, and enroll in benefits. Namely helps you easily handle everything from onboarding, payroll, time tracking, open enrollment, employee engagement, and so much more, so that you can get the time and data you need to drive the initiatives your company really cares about. I want you to simplify your HR processes with Namely, so I've arranged a special offer for my listeners. Right now, get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform, but only when you go to namely.com/humanhr. Remember, go to namely.com/humanhr for your free month today.
And I even think too, another TEDx speaker talks about CEOs being in this optimism bubble and not being able to relate to the struggles of their employees, and in some ways seeing that that's their role. Well, my role is to be the continual optimist, but it's like you've got to start to think about what is our example doing to the people around us. It doesn't allow them to take a rest and a break. It doesn't allow them to make mistakes and be imperfect.
Right.
So I think we do have to acknowledge, without falling into sort of shame, that our behaviors are also having negative impacts on others.
Yeah.
So yeah. And sometimes that's the only thing that can motivate us. Sometimes we won't do it for ourselves, but like, I'll do it for my daughter.
I love it. No, it's really a good point. I mean, I was reflecting on what, when you said reevaluating your value set and really thinking about almost like what you stand for. I had a guest on a few years ago who talked about that a lot. Like, what is it that you stand for, and who do you want people to remember you to be? And it's really interesting because I realize that the only other voice on this podcast is mine. And so I often share my own anecdotes here, outside of what a guest has shared, but at risk of doing that again, when I think of like climbing the corporate ladder and career growth, and I get so many messages from listeners about how they can scale in their HR careers and everything, which is amazing. And especially in HR, I mean, it's still statistically, there is a majority of females or of women in HR still. I think things are starting to level out a little bit more than when I even started being in HR, but most of the time I am hearing from women, and there's always this like almost a power struggle. And so your point on checking the ego, I really appreciate. I think it's important that we all remember that our ego is so intertwined in our careers. I really took it as feedback for myself too, because I think about my own career and I'm like, is there a reason why I want that next best thing in my role? Like, is it because I really want it, because that's what I want to do? Or is it because I'm trying to prove something? Who am I proving it to? Am I proving it to myself? Am I proving it to others? Do I have to prove anything? So this is, I think I'm in my 30s now, and I think differently about careers and all of that. And especially my mindset changed when I got married over a year ago, because things reshape themselves, priorities reshape themselves. When I look at leaders in organizations that I've worked for who are women, who are in the C-suite or executive level, and they have children, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. How can they do that? I mean, it's like one job to raise a family or to have a family, and then it's another job to have this job. How do they do it? And so I guess I'm just sharing this because these are my immediate reflections that, no one says you have to do both. Obviously, there is a financial implication here if you have to have, depending on income levels and things like that. And the majority of the time, if considering in a heterosexual relationship, at least the mother might be the birthing parent if that's how things work out, but that's not the only way that a parent will bond with a child. But I really do think about that, how society, even during COVID, I talked about this, that women exited the workforce because they were the ones making less most of the time. And they were the ones who were, managing the home. And I realize I'm making a lot of generalizations here, but there are statistics that show this. And at that time, I think it was probably early into the podcast, honestly, where I said, I hope that this doesn't set women back. I hope that, whatever progress we have made in leveling the playing field, and kind of coming back to this point that you made about potential, that I kind of hoped that we wouldn't see the negative side of women kind of taking on this responsibility. And again, it's
Mm-hmm.
not to say that men aren't, but I think it's an important point. So I want to kind of pose to you another question on this topic of potential achievement, how gender plays a role, how race plays a role, and things like that. But I guess the question really is there a way today within our society for us to better highlight potential versus achievement versus performance? Is there a way to continuously level the playing field? I mean, we talk so much in HR about DE&I and comp and ben and all of these things, but talking about it and doing something about it are two totally different things. So how, like, where do we start, and how do we ensure equity within that potential?
Right. Yes. A great question. So one of the things is that we do have to design it in there, and yes, there's been so much work around how do we have unbiased hiring processes, but that hasn't necessarily translated into promotion processes. So some of
Mhm.
the same things apply. So again, you don't want it to be a single. We're all biased. We all have bias within us. You
Mhm.
don't want it to be a single manager and their biases, right? If you can have a diverse team of people who are making promotion decisions, that starts to mitigate some of the bias. Again, a diverse team. One, two, there has to be really clear performance criteria that are met, and then that means you get a promotion that using the potential that is just it's not objective, and it's not measurable, right? So it really should be based on the performance using very objective criteria that are related to the next stage. um, and then things like self appraisals are not helpful, because basically, say for example, between a man and a woman, if a woman was appraising herself, she may pick a 6 and a man may pick a 9, and then a manager is looking at that data and saying, oh, she's probably more like a 7 and he's probably more like an 8, but they're still
Mm,
not then equal, like even if a manager sort of adapts for it.
that's
um,
interesting.
so so self appraisals is another one, and some of this comes from Iris Burnett, who's the head of the Kennedy School of Business at Harvard, and she has a book called Equality by Design. And these are the things, these are the tools, like self appraisals are biased, right? They're not helpful. Another thing is that how do we even track our achievements? So it's very hard potentially for some groups to be able to talk about their achievements, and so again, having ways that your progress and the things you've been working on, the achievements you've made, sort of more automatically logged. And so the manager is constantly seeing what you're doing, rather than coming to this one moment in time and suddenly you've got to produce all this. And then
Mhm.
there are challenges for women beyond that. You know, even if we do self-promote or if we negotiate because of stereotypes that is not what women should be doing, then we're penalized when we do those things. So it's not that we're worse at doing them, it's that we're penalized when we do them because it doesn't conform to the stereotype of what women are seen to be. And so yeah, there's all these challenges that really stem from stereotypes and bias. So it's like, what are the things, excuse me, that we can do to mitigate those bias? And it really isn't unconscious bias training, because in fact that can make things worse. I'm just going to cough. If you want to do a
I'm putting the time
post-it
down. You're
note
all
today,
good.
please.
Yeah, no, please. I know I'm
There we
sipping
go.
like lemon water right now. It's
I get froggy. Yeah, so unconscious bias training, for example, makes you aware of the biases you have and then makes you think, well, now I'm aware, I've dealt with the problem. I was the problem, it was my brain. And now we're all good. So I'll stop making any effort to interrupt biases because it was me in the first place. And it's like, okay, then interruption bias stops. And so actually unconscious bias makes things worse. That's why we have to design it into the systems. And I think another thing that's changing in HR is HR is saying that they are being asked to be agents of change and people officers, and yet they don't have a background in behavior change or even, behavioral psychology and those things that are so important to understand how difficult change is. We're very afraid of change, and so one that change can be quite fear-inducing. So as the agent of change trying to lead change, if you're not at all aware that the conditions for change are 1, well-being, 2, psychological safety, 3, emotional intelligence, and if you're going in to try and be this agent of change and all your employees are burnt out, they can't cope with another initiative, no matter how well intentioned. So I think that's important. And 2, to recognize how much support is needed for change. We need social support, we need infrastructure support, we need accountability partners. We need people that give us positive reinforcement. We need so much support to change, and that is often missing. And then against this backdrop of what I call change branding, which is everyone saying, well, yes, we are doing DEI and we've pledged to do the Thrive mental health pledge, and everybody in the organization knowing that nothing has changed. And so against that backdrop, people are cynical about it, right?
Yes.
And they want organizational change. They do not want perks, and that's the big mismatch at the moment that's happening, that we really need to address. And that's why I'm sort of trying to help women leaders with understanding how to lead change, so that they can understand all those contexts and the complexity, and then actually sort of set themselves up for success by understanding, how to move forward with a vision, with vulnerability and cultural humility, and to address the conditions before you start to try and even sort of make other changes. But those conditions are also related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and also are the right conditions for innovation. So there's so many advantages to approaching it in that way.
Yeah, it's true. Change management is change management is hard. Change is hard. It's hard for everyone, I would imagine. And so if you're also the agent of change, how are you changing with the change? It's all of those things. And then on top of that too, I love what you said about change branding. That is so insightful, because there are so many instances out there where companies say, we care about DE&I, we care about equity, we care about all these things. And then there isn't a whole lot of action. And it's just this, to your point, it's change branding, but where is the action to show for it? And then this cynicism that you're saying happens within the employee population makes it very difficult to I mean, it's very difficult to come out of that. Like, if it would be better for companies not to commit to these things that are important and to really devise a clear plan for how they are going to physically, emotionally, mentally commit to the change that they are saying they're committing to. Because when you say, and I'm sure we've all done it, where we say, we're going to do this thing. Hey, employees, get excited. And then nothing happens. There's always going to be a group of people who remember what you said. There will be a group of people who forgot. And they're going to be the best case scenario in an instance where someone is not actually fulfilling their commitments. But those who remember are going to ultimately resent an organization for not following through on something they were excited about. And to bring this back to the point that you were sharing before about even productivity, and how productivity, and then someone valuing productivity being told to rest, like that's not what they value, right? When I think about all of these agents for change that you've shared and all of this insight, I do think about also the messaging that we tell not only ourselves but our employees, especially as HR professionals, when we say take time off, take something for yourself, right? Here are all these perks that are better for you, that are intending to drive engagement, which from an intentional perspective, like the intention is really good, right? But if the organization on the whole, like I guess more specifically, if the C-suite are not the ones driving that, you might as well not even roll out those perks. You might as well not drive that message around taking time off if your leader, their leader's leader, is never taking time themselves. And so all of this messaging at an organizational level really does impact at the employee level. I mean, it's really, I realize like employees make up the organization, but obviously business decisions sometimes don't match what employees need. So
Right.
with that,
And
I think one of the things that I was really excited to talk about was this idea of the 4-day work week. I did an episode back maybe in 2020 about this. I talk about it to anyone willing to listen, that 4-day work weeks are amazing and they don't reduce productivity. And I feel like, I would love to hear from you how the 4-day work week has potentially impacted burnout, if at all, or preventing burnout. And if you could walk us through why, from a statistical and factual background, why a 4-day work week does not decrease productivity. So I can send this to anyone, any naysayers out there.
Goodness, you got hard questions there. Exactly. And I think, back to your point about the messaging too, is the finger pointing to say, take a vacation, do self-care, is the messaging that you are the problem, you need fixed, and you're not doing enough to manage your own stress, instead of saying, oh, we as an organization are causing that stress. And I think that's one thing that's very challenging for HR and all parts of the organization, is to own the role they're playing. Now, legally, I think they find that threatening. So I mean, it has its complications, but actually, I interviewed the CEO and the head of employee experiences at Oyster HR recently, and they have a mental health Slack channel, and they were really concerned about launching that. And it's been the best thing they ever did, because it's a space where people, how they've created it to feel safe, to have these conversations. So I think this is part of the problem, is that when we're coming from this defensive standpoint, that's one of the biggest problems to us actually moving forward, because we have to admit that our organizational systems and policies and leaders are part of the problem. And again, that's very scary, and it also can have implications for who is responsible, right? But I think that's where we need to move out of that and into what are the solutions. So to talk about your 4-day week, and again, I'm going to have to say, I am not a specialist in the 4-day week, and I've kept up with the some of the news reports around it. and in terms of particularly around productivity. So I haven't necessarily read a paper to say that it's reducing burnout, but essentially, it's definitely something I recommend to burnout-proof companies, because there's multiple things that are also probably related to it too. Is we need to have much more focused time in the workplace. Like, we need to decide on our collaborative hours, and we need to have a lot more time that is interrupted so people can do focused, impactful work. So that's really problematic. So, I mean, if you had a 4-day week full of pointless meetings, maybe productivity wouldn't change. So I think we really have to sort of say is, we've got one day less, let's use the other days in the most efficient way. And even the Surgeon General said this: organizations need to get rid of the stupid stuff, right? We really have to get rid of the things that are affecting our productivity too. So again, I'm imagining that companies that went to the 4-day work week also did it, or in a, hopefully did it, but if not, we need to do it in an intentional way where those days are best used. And again, I think we just have to remember the reason why, for example, we had legislation and health and safety requirements to have 8-hour days was because beyond that it wasn't safe, right? I mean, and that's the case in so many manual labor industries, or again,
Yeah.
mistakes start to happen in medicine when people are overworked. So we do know that more isn't better, yet we have this mental model of more is better. So I think that's definitely something we really have to understand. And I think then the other part of this is, I think people assume that if people are it's like the we'll make our employees happy, and or rather, if our employees are productive, they will be happy, right? And it's the other way around. Our employees have to come to work healthy so that they can be productive. So flipping that equation, whereas we have so much messaging around work is fulfilling, work will fulfill you, it will make you happy, and it's actually, we have to say health and happiness precede our ability to be productive. And so, yes, people need a sense of purpose in their work, which isn't always provided either. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me one bit that the shorter weeks are more productive. And again, I've seen that in European companies who have had different work week hours for ages, but they also have, very long summer week vacations, potentially, where the whole organization stops. And it's those opportunities for everybody to take a break, for no one to be working, that you're not having to check your email and respond. Those types of breaks, that's when our brains regenerate, and then we come back with the best ability to be creative and innovative, which is what creates growth and profits at the end of the day. And I think back to that, happy workers equals happy customers, which we've forgotten as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. I mean, I have 3 Post-its worth of notes, and I'm already thinking about the newsletter that I'm going to write for this when the episode comes out, and all of the exciting things that I will not begrudgingly put on social media, because I do like posting on LinkedIn when it comes to these episodes, because that does fill my cup. So we went from talking about social media and giving someone an idea for a thesis, although I'm sure it already exists, to talking about how employee experience is what drives productivity. And I just love that all of these topics have been discussed today, thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here and being part of the podcast. Can you tell the listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about you, your podcast, and what you do?
Thanks so much for that opportunity. Yes, the best place is to find me on my website, which is www.drjacquelinekerr.com. And I blog there. My podcast, Overcoming Working Mom Burnout, is there. I have lots of free resources around burnout, identifying it in your employees. Why do we get stalled in our change initiatives? And my TEDx talks there. And I'll be hopefully launching my training and leadership program for women this year. So that
Amazing.
will also be available there.
Oh, you'll have to let me know so we can talk about it on here. Maybe you'll come back and let us know, any learnings or how it's gone. But thank you so much again, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.